What about China do you find, I guess, to be like an example or a symbolism to uphold and bring out here for a May Day?
Lifting 800 million people out of poverty.
So like, you mean like recently, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about China's past history? Like there's a lot of countries who have like bad past history in terms like Germany and United States. What do you think about China's past history in their regards towards like not doing so great for a lot of their people?
Not doing so great, how?
You could say like maybe start with the Great Famine, and that led to about 60 million deaths in China.
When you embargo a country with every single power in the world and then it has a famine, whose fault is that really?
What do you think about then? Well, that is a good question. Embargo does have an effect. People say that. People say like there's an effect right now, like North Korea. Maybe that might force it to finally like open up.
China was also a feudal country at the time. We all need to be aware of that, of the historical situation that China was in, and for the historical situation that China is in, what it may do with what it could, and it did fucking fantastically. For a third world country, it lifted 800 million people out of poverty, and I think we should be damn proud of that.
What do you think about like Mao's personal agriculture reforms? Like outside of the embargo, it was him that said you got to plant seeds together because he felt like happy seeds grow together, and that led to the horrible ruins of agriculture there. That people will say that led to the mass starvation of parents eating their children from that. You know, I wouldn't say like maybe embargo would have an effect, but also their internal agricultural practices endowed by Mao would have been a big particular effect of that consequences.
Yeah, it's a combination of factors from several different things. But to be honest, that's a drop in the bucket compared to what the rest of the countries have been doing to it. From its very existence, it was declared war upon by every single power on the world. They tried to drop nukes on it several times. They massacred millions of Chinese people in Korea. In World War II, 20 million people died. There was a massive famine of 5 million people in the province of Hunan. There's famines throughout all of China's history. Famines are a very common thing. Russia, very same thing. Famines throughout their history. Famines used to be a very common thing until relatively recently.
Right, would you say like some of the social common denominator is that in terms of socialism or variants of communism, it's difficult they run into economic calculation problem in terms of allocation resources.
When you're constantly being invaded and imperialized, colonized, it's kind of hard to reallocate resources while you're constantly under threat from an outside force.
Okay, so you can have outside force. You had like maybe the opium crisis with Britain. You can say that. You had Japan attacking China for a period of time. You had a rape of Nanking. You had that as well. The Civil War. What do you think then? But you can't deny, though, Mao himself also being personally responsible and put liability on him as well in terms of
the flaws of
the massive deaths
all day, every day, for hours on end. But at the end of the day,
you acknowledge that he did do a lot.
Everyone acknowledges that. All the Chinese people, all these fucking Westerners with your fucking minds convoluted and thinking that 1.5 billion Chinese people are being manipulated by the government, the Chinese government. Y'all got your heads fucked if you think that's reality.
I mean, it's not.
You guys are highly distorting what reality is. Marxists in China oftentimes criticize Mao Zedong, yet Mao Zedong is at 90% favorability ratings among the Chinese population.
What do you think about
I think Chinese people know more about Mao Zedong than any white person here.
I would say, though, it's difficult for them to speak out against Mao. You get there's secret police that'll round you up. You had this experiment that he had in which, like, Well, here, yeah, and we're not in China. We could speak openly about this sort of stuff, right?
No, you can speak openly. Black people cannot. Latino people cannot.
I'm Latino. I can speak openly. I don't have problems with that.
But you're white passing, man.
That's my white passing. Yeah. So are you in charge of telling people whether they're white or not?
No.
Are albino people white passing? Do you say they have white passing?
No.
Because black people can be albino and they're kind of white,
but at the
right?
end of the day, you're here in this country and you're at a higher state than most people in this country right now. You have to recognize that. And you're in a position of privilege.
What privilege do I have?
We all have privilege more than black and Latino people, most black and Latino people do in this country.
What privilege does a Latino have more than a white person?
I didn't say you had more privilege than me. And you're trying to convolute. You're trying
I'm trying to understand.
You're trying to derail.
There's a lot of people don't understand this sort of conversation.
You're trying to derail this conversation because this has nothing to do with what the original conversation is. You saw me carrying the Chinese flag. You wanted to come here to get your video here.
Yeah.
And so here we are.
Okay.
you're trying to derail the conversation.
Well, you brought up white privilege. I'm kind of curious to understand most of that sort of stuff.
I'm trying to bring up that in this country, there is a huge amount of flaws, and people can go about and say that they're proud of their country. I can go and say that I'm proud of China because it lifted out 800 million people out of poverty and is still doing something, and is planning on eradicating poverty by 2020.
I would say in terms of lessening a lot of their communist control, they've done a good deal, you could say, towards that. I think maybe they have a lot more towards responsibility towards North Korea ending the war. Now, a lot of people want to give it to Trump, but I think China putting the pressure, yeah. But I also like to examine this stuff kind of soberly in terms of China, because they have a lot of a huge mass murder death, over 60 million people. There's people who come from China and talk about these kind of issues as well. It's not just you who view China and say, yeah, this is an awesome country, but people come from China. Do you think that also their voices are discredited when they criticize their home country?
I'm talking about actual Chinese people living in China.
Yeah, China people who escape from China here, when they criticize their home country, do you think that they're making it up and then they're lying?
So Chinese Americans have more say than Chinese people actually do. That's what you're saying. American Chinese people that the American government favors have more say on what the Chinese government actually is than what the 1.5 billion people in China actually do. This is what you're saying.
I'm saying, are you discrediting people from China who's escaped and discussed like the horrid conditions in China that come into the U.S. from their own experience, being actually from China? I mean, don't you think there's some valid concern for them to speaking out against China as well?
There's people speaking out about China right now. It's actually pretty common in China. There's protests in China. There are people in China that are protesting the government of China. I'm just saying.
All right, okay. If you think that those people kind of fur well, I mean, there's a lot of documented cases where people who even come here and have family out there, if they speak ill of China, sometimes their family just disappears in China. What do you think about those kinds of situations? It's not particular like to have like the freedom of speech. I mean, they have like a citizen score in which like if you're
what cases?
Great many cases. Look up Chinese model, for example. She competes. She tours around like the world.
What's the name of this?
Yeah, I could get you the name of the model. Not a problem. So she speaks landishly about how the situation in China. Let me find Chinese.
No, but you can't deny that the U.S. government gives a mass amount of credence to political refugees that come from the country, that were kicked out by the Chinese government, that were given aid by the U.S. government, and the U.S. government brought into their country for a very specific reason. You can't then go about and say, okay, well, what about these Chinese people coming from China? We've been ignoring Chinese people coming from China for the past like hundreds of years or so. Like the U.S. government, right after the People's Republic of China came in, they fired every single Chinese speaker in the State Department. We've never given a single fuck about what the 1.5 billion people living in China. We've never given a single fuck about what they care about. They're just a bunch of drones.
What do you think China should advocate now to help their people? What do you think? What more could you think could they do?
Xi Jinping is doing pretty well with the anti-corruption purges. They need to keep it up because there is unfortunately a lot of corruption that needs to be culled. There needs to be more redistribution. There isn't enough, and China needs to pick up on that because they need to get reconnected back with their roots. And a lot of Chinese youth agree with my sentiment here.
Do you have a lot of Chinese students here as well?
We have Chinese students. They don't feel comfortable coming here because of people like this with the cameras, taking pictures, getting them deported by the U.S. government.
There's nobody here in China then, you're saying that?
There are Chinese people here. You just have to go and look for them. We're not going to put Chinese people here for you guys to just...
I mean, I have Chinese friends, and they say differently. I mean, would you ever be open in talking with one of them and their experiences?
I have talked to many people.
Okay.
I've heard their experience.
Yeah, so I'm saying I've heard many stories with my friends from China, and they seem conflicting with the stories that they're giving.
I've heard many stories of when I was in China.
You went to China?
It sounds
How was that?
It was good. I went to the poorest region of China, Yunnan province.
And what was their experience there?
It was poverty.
Poverty?
Yeah.
Do you think, I guess, being in China, did you feel like, I don't know, But the government's helping a lot of those kinds of people out
The
there?
government is helping a lot. I mean, the People's Liberation Army is one of the most favorably viewed militaries in the world compared to the U.S. military. A lot of the U.S. citizenship feels openly uneasy about the U.S. military, whereas the People's Liberation Army rarely goes invading other people's countries and is only there to actually help people in crises.
All right, so you would be against like United States imperialism over the world, right? So anti-war, right? So you'd be against Chinese and their provocation of Taiwan, then you would say, right?
Taiwan has always been China.
Well, I mean,
Taiwan is China.
don't you think people have the freedom to secede and create their own community? If they don't want to be a part of their community, they voluntarily and consensually want to separate?
When secession comes up, secession only matters, again, when it's in the U.S.'s interest. They see Taiwan only as an air base in the Pacific. The military advisors of the United States have muttered this several times to refer to Taiwan, to refer to Okinawa, to refer to all these Pacific islands as their aerial land, as their bases against China.
There is an overreach of military bases overseas for sure, but what about the people in Taiwan who just want to create their own country? They don't want to be part of China. They just want to be their own people.
Okay, so Taiwan. You're familiar with the history of Taiwan, yes?
Enlighten me about the history of Taiwan.
I'm not going to enlighten anyone.
Well, we're saying
I would go and actually research the history of Taiwan. The Taiwanese government is only here because it's a remnant of the nationalist government that's been prolonged and allowed to exist thanks to U.S. involvement in the Chinese Civil War.
So you don't think there's actually genuine interest for people wanting to voluntarily secede and create their own community?
I think there's people that want to secede. There's always people that want to secede. There's Uyghurs that want to secede. Uyghurs who, of course, are supported by the Turkish fascists and Daesh. So, again, I'm hesitant there as well.
Right. So do you think, though, if the people in Taiwan do want to secede and be their own country, they still have the right to secede, right? Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean just because China claims over them.
But just because the U.S. wants that land.
Yeah, I think the U.S. should get out of there too. Yeah, I agree with you with that.
But it's not going to happen. That's not reality. You're thinking in an idealistic world. You're in an imaginary world. That's not what's happening. U.S. isn't just going to pull out of the Pacific. That's not reality.
It was not reality to think that China would leave Taiwan alone if the U.S.
not at all reality.
to leave them alone, right?
That's
China would want to conquer them.
That's been their one policy, has been reunification. Since day one, reunification.
Right.
Their main thing.
Right. So it's not like a fantasy to believe that these people who want to voluntarily secede, they'll be met with violent force.
That's
force them
not,
to be a
you're
part of
distorting. You're distorting.
Well, that's what happens if the U.S. sees some reality outside our fantasies, thinking, if the U.S. will leave voluntarily because, they have an interest there, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
China has an interest because they're nearby. They don't want a U.S. military bases next to them as well, right? But if they do leave, that China will come in there violently to reunify, as you were, and not voluntarily, despite the wishes of the people who live on that island. Don't you think then maybe we should side with the people on the island and resist the reunification that's forced?
That's not, no.
Do you think people should be forced to be into relationships they don't want to be into?
Should be.
So you think the people of Taiwan...
The people of Taiwan only existed there because they genocided the original Taiwanese population. They're nothing more than Han people that have moved there over the recent centuries. They're all most of the vast majority of them that hold power are remnants of the nationalist government or remnants of the Japanese fascists that were originally holding dominance in that island. So excuse me for not siding with them.
Well, I mean, these things happened generations ago, right? I can't really follow.
It's still happening right now. There's still politicians who have remnants of fascist ancestry and will hearken back to that.
I'm talking like the new people born in Taiwan, right? I can't really fault an individual for crimes of older generation. If that's what you're saying, that is true, right?
Taiwan that recognize themselves as Japanese. And if you don't think that, you should visit Taiwan.
Maybe one day. What do you think about if that's the case that you're making, right? In terms of like their occupation of an island, Taiwan, and that's why I say they have no right there to be there. Give it to Chinese. Don't you think the same thing could be said of Cyprus in terms like Turkish Muslim forces invading that island? Because there were no really any Turkish people in Cyprus. It was Greek until they wanted
people in Cyprus.
I've been to Cyprus. There's a lot of people in Cyprus, and so I would say their invasion of it caused the civil war to start, right? Because Turkey did not want to give up claim over that island because they wanted to succeed and they wanted to actually be part of Greece in that country.
That's a fundamentally different thing. The Chinese actually have a long history with Taiwan and have actual history with Taiwan. Taiwan wouldn't exist if it wasn't birthed out of the repercussions of the Chinese Civil War that the U.S. prolonged. So if you are siding with this U.S. puppet state in the middle of the Pacific that couldn't exist without U.S. support, that only exists right now because of the theft of the wealth of the Chinese people, and then the evacuation of that wealth to some island, often just off the coast. I don't know. You're backing a government that stole all of China's wealth and actually was one of the causes for those famines you were talking about.
Well, I don't really back any governments. I don't back the government of Taiwan either. I will back the people to abolish their own government as well.
Isn't that an interesting? That's comfortable. That's a comfortable position.
To abolish government?
You don't have to actually have a lot of realistic stances.
Well, governments have been abolished. It doesn't necessarily. It's just a history of world history of that happening.
That's not necessarily a realistic analysis of the situation. You're just saying, "Oh, I think all governments should be abolished."
Well, you just assumed that I was supporting the Taiwanese government, which I don't.
Well, that's you kind of are here.
How's that?
You're here with your camera.
Yeah.
You're giving credence to this, and you're bringing questions and information that were conjured up by the U.S. media apparatus, and you're using that to question me instead of actually having I don't know. Your own research and stuff on the subject.
All right. I would say my own research on the subject has seen governments create democides in the 20th century that cost over the deaths of hundreds of millions, including the U.S. since World War II, right? So I don't trust any government, not the U.S. government, not the Chinese government, not the Taiwanese government. I think they're a big detriment to the lives of peaceful people who want to live voluntarily, consensually, without politicians forcing them and telling them how to live their own lives.
Okay, but so again, this is you as being someone over here, and you're going and you're saying that the Chinese people that overwhelmingly support the Chinese government.
You're saying it's not like they have freedom of speech. If they don't, they have a citizens rating score on them. If you kind of say things out of line, you disappear.
Again, this is another example of you just using everything that the U.S. media is just popping out about China, and then you're just spewing this.
It's not just China. These things happen in other communist-like countries. Cuba, for example. It happens all the time in Cuba.
Again, I wouldn't call them communist countries at all, and they wouldn't call themselves communist countries, and no one would refer to themselves as communist country because communist country is actually an incorrect term. That's not at all a correct term.
So the people who escape Cuba saying this communist country, you discount their voices too?
You're ridiculous, man.
My grandfather escaped from Cuba.
Why did he leave Cuba?
He goes Cuba because they were threatening members of his family's relatives. They're disappearing.
Okay,
yeah.
What?
He in a dust cropper plane. He escaped with a toy compass and a knife to fight off sharks.
Why did the Cuban
He was a farmer.
Was he a farmer or did he
was just a
own
farmer.
Farm and exploit labor?
He was a farmer. There's hundreds of thousands of people escape Cuba, and many of them risk their lives.
Did he use his own labor on the farm, or did he use the labor?
He used his own labor on the farm. Yes.
All right. You know what? I don't know about Cuba.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah. I'm not gonna say everything Cuba did was good.
He risked his life. He left behind family. People were disappearing left and right.
Okay.
In the beginning, Castro promised a great many things. He met someone.
Actual numbers out. You can just say left and right. You can just say what's generated by the U.S. media, and everyone here is going to take you for granted because that's what the U.S. media apparatus allows. That's the exact situation that this breeds.
Let me say, I'm relying on just U.S. media information. I'm also relying for first-hand situation of people escaping from communism. And
it's been solely U.S. media.
This is first-hand accounts from people who escaped communism from Cuba. Them saying these stories, not just me or the media or anything else.
There's also Cubans in Cuba who didn't escape, as you put it.
Mostly black and darker Cubans too.
Who stayed there because they are fine with what the government is doing. I think that their perspective has as much validity as the people who came here. I think they both have bias.
I would say they don't really have much of the freedom to freely travel and to come out here to see and tell us about these stories, right?
We don't have freedom is a relative term. I think that the oppression faced under states is equal to the oppression faced under markets. They're both oppressive institutions.
I've never heard anyone though say I risk life and limb to escape capitalism. Right?
Okay, What happens? What happens if you don't participate in capitalism?
You starve and die
Yeah, you
out on the
starve to
streets.
death. If you don't want to participate in traditional capitalist means, I know a lot of people who didn't want to get a job, and then so as an escape, they did like the only thing available to them, which was selling weed, and now they're in prison. That's not a freedom. You know, you're not voluntarily participating.
I agree. Yeah, and that's the state. That's the state passing those laws. That's government, right? And we're pretty much against this government too. That's a war on peaceful people, right? On plants,
Okay,
right?
yeah, but you're trying to. I mean, I assume you're like you're an anarcho-capitalist, bruh.
Free market anarchist.
That's
Nah,
no.
you're just a capitalist, man.
You're just a capitalist.
That's
nothing. There's nothing anarchist
Can you
about
define? Can you define capitalism?
Okay, the private ownership of the means of production.
All right, so means of production can mean like my own body, right?
No,
I produce a lot of things that flavor my own body.
It means fucking factories and land and shit,
Things
man.
that produce things,
Things
like
that
my computer.
produce commodity. Yes.
Okay.
The factory that made your computer. Yes, that
No,
is
I mean
the
me
means of
owning my own
production.
computer
No.
and creating my own livelihood through my
Fuck
computer.
this.
Yeah.
Y'all are dumb.
Thanks so much for the lecture that you provided. I think it's always kind of good and enlightening to see like a lot of people talk about like the ills of communism, because it's kind of like you said, it's weird to see here in the United States fascination with it, you can say, among students. What would you have to say to like fascination with Maoism, for example, with American students here with communism of that kind?
Yes, the Maoist era actually is a huge scar in my father's generation. I think because it was so long ago, so a lot of American youth are not really aware. But I think the easiest way is to talk and to really read stories, read the truths that happened in that era. Mm-hmm. Talk to people who have experience under communism, who have been abused and without ways to speak up for themselves, have their integrity taken away, families destroyed. Communism is not a fascinating, ideology. It's a real tragedy to humankind. And for people like me and my family that are still living under the shadow of it, I mean, we're the best example. Why communism is completely against human nature. Why, when I decide to speak up in Canada, my family's back in China would be threatened and to the point of self-harm. Yeah.
Right, and so it's like I've been doing like a reading about it. I think there's an interesting part, like 100 Years Bloom or Flowers Bloom or campaign or something like that. I guess where he tricked a lot of like the liberal arts students or something, or poets to come out to be very vocal about the government.
And then all of a sudden, all of them are persecuted.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good way to get people out, to show themselves, to give them confidence, to show their opposition to the government, and they were rounded up at once. That's a trick.
Yeah.
And it's really nasty. It's through these political movements like that and the Tiananmen massacre, the Chinese people's, their dignity just got stripped away again and again, to the point right now, they don't care about anything at all, as long as they can live and make money. And that's really sad.
Right.
So I think read into history, read what really happened. It's so important. Don't just follow a tyranny idea. Like, actually know the truth.
Right.
The truth is powerful.
And thank you so much for your lecture talking about the truth about the horrors over there. I think a lot of the stories are kind of very hopeful. There's like a Communist Memorial Foundation here. That's part of
That's them.
That's them over there, yeah. So for me, I think that's great to see out here, especially in D.C. They have the memorial out there as well, to kind of bring truth to the light of this kind of darkness that's been hidden, especially among the people in China. I hear a lot. So thank you so much for the lecture and coming here to the conference.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Of course.